Today we're starting to learn the next section of Shas, which is Kachim. In that possibly the Gemara brings down a Masechta Shabbos, the 6 different Zdorim of Mishnayos. And the word Chochmas, we learn Kachim because Kachim you need Chochma. Fascinating the Hagdama of the Rambam Pirish Mishnayos on Kachim, and the Rambam writes, and we can see today how real it is. He says that Kachim is a subject that no one really cares or knows about. He says, to the greatest fools, because Kachim is something that's not so relevant today. And because it's not so relevant today, he says that no one really knows it. So I need to spend more time in telling you what it's all about. And the Rambam spends a lot of time in Halacha as well in the Pirish Mishnayos to explain. You'll see there are no Rishonim on Kachim, except Rashi Taisus, whatever, the normal one. But you don't have the normal Rishonim that we have. There's nothing on Kachim. Nothing on Kachim. And the Achrayim say Kachim is just as important as everything else because Kol HaLoimed, if you learn Teiros Eila, is Kili Hikriv Eila and Chatas and all that, so it is relevant today because we learn it as if you brought it up. Anyway, there are different kinds of kabbanis. You have kachim and kachim kalum. You have two categories of kabbanis. Those that can only be eaten in the base of Midrash, known as kachim, like a chatas, korban chatas, for a sin offering, or an asham, a guilt offering, korban oila. And then you have kachim kalum. These are kabbanis like shlamim, teida, korban pesach, choyer, maisa. They can all be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim. There are main 4 activities in every korban. There's the shchita, you shecht it. And then the main part of the korban is the sprinkling of the blood. But there are 3 activities involved in sprinkling the blood. There's the Kabbalah, you have to receive the blood. Then you have the Halacha, you have to transport the blood, carry it. And then there is the Zrika itself. And you have to do them all correctly. You have to do them all 2 kinds of Lishma. You have to have the right korban in mind. Plus you have to have the right person in mind, the Bailim, the right person. And when it comes to Bailim, doesn't matter what activity it is, it's really all about the Zrika. The Bailim, in part, is the sprinkling of the blood. So when we say that if you shecht it, or if you carry the blood, or if you are, if you're receiving the blood, that has to be l'shem Bailim that you have in mind, I am going to sprinkle this blood for the Bailim. If we say I'm carrying the blood for the Bailim, that doesn't mean anything. You have to say I'm shechting it so I can sprinkle the blood for the Bailim, because for the Bailim, the kapara, the korban, is the sprinkling of the blood. The Gemara later on says there are 6 things that you have to have in mind when you do a korban. Machlekes Rishonim of these 6 things are only b'negei shchita, why you're doing the shchita, which is the Rambam, or it implies all the 4 principal activities. You have to have those 6 things in mind. We'll see later what they are. For the Bailim.
Is that only by
all kabbalas? All kabbalas.
Why do we say kohen moichel by the miskapet?
That's something. That's part of it. And shchita is also important, but the Bailim part is that. And we actually have a machlekes. There's a famous Rashi, and there's a Noida B'Yehuda in the beginning of Masechta Brachas. And based on a Rashi in the tests, I think in Psachim, that those kabbanas that a person Yisrael can eat, that's also part of the kapara. The korban are complete if you don't finish eating it. Anyway, let's do the Gemara. Mishnah Beis Amar Aleph Masechta Zevachim. Kol hazvachim any korban shenizbechu shaloi lishman, that they were geschochten and you did not have in mind the right. The korban, right now we're talking about the korban they had in mind. Shadim, the korban is still kosher, but the bailim have to bring the korban again. So the animal can still be eaten, it's still brought up as whatever the original korban was, but the bailim have to bring, so the animal is kosher, and you have to continue the other activities doing the right way as if it's the original korban, but the bailim have not been yaitza. Because it says shenizbechu shaloi lishman, doesn't say shezavchu shaloi lishman, because it's not the zrich. Remember, I told you again, by bailim you have to have in mind the sprinkling. So nizbechu as if this is the trigger, but it's not the zrich itself the problem. The problem is that through the zrich you had in mind the sprinkling for whatever, also for them. Yeah, sorry, for them. So they also have the wrong korban in mind as well. Chutzban pesach v'chatas. The only exceptions are korban pesach and korban chatas. If you had the wrong korban in mind, it's possible completely. When? Ha pesach, the korban pesach is only bismane. which is it's a big machlekes tonight later on between Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Yehuda ben Seder, whether it's according to Rabbi Shua, it's only from chatzos until night, the time you could bring the carbon. According to Rabbi Yehuda ben Seder, it's the entire day. Even though if you bring it before chatzos, it's not kosher, but that day is a day set aside for it. So, but our Mishnah seems to say bismanoi, which means only from chatzos. Now, even though you're supposed to bring the carbon Pesach after the carbon tamid, but the if you bring it before you yaitza, so therefore it's considered from chatzos and onwards. And the chatos is becholzman. Chatos any time. In fact, the Mefarshim have a hard time understanding. What do you mean? When is it zmanu? What do you tell me chatos becholzmani? Pesach, I understand. Is the rest of the year. The rest of the year, Korban Pesach, we'll see later. What happens if you bring a Korban Pesach after the zman or before the zman? It automatically turns into a shlamim. And therefore, as a shlamim, it has the same thing like all the other kabbalas. That is the answer. So, but by you tell me chatos becholzmani, as if is there a time that's loy bezmana, and you tell me whenever the right time is? What does it mean? So someone to say, all kinds of explanations. Someone to say that's chatzah tibur, but someone to say there is a leibus man about chatzas. Let's say a nozir sets aside his animal, and before the 30 days are up, he brings it up. So that's a leibus man. It's already set aside as a chatzas, but he brings it before is mechuyev. Anyway, Rabbi Lezer, he adds one more thing, and he says afa osham. He says the carbon osham is similar to carbon pesach. Ha pesach bismane. So therefore, he says this is how it is. Pesach bismane and chatzas v'osham b'cholzman. Chatzas osham anytime. If you have the wrong carbon in mind, it is possible. Chacham disagree because it says chatzas who is a mere to tell you only about chatzas this din applies. By osham, it's like anything else. The animal is considered like an osham. Usually not nobody was yet. You have to bring another one, but the animal can be eaten and so on. And then comes along and Abelezer finishes off. Abelezer says, why am I comparing Osham to Chatas? Abelezer says, Chatas bar lachet. What's the idea of a karma Chatas? For a sin. And what's Osham? Other Avedas, Asham Me'ilas, he stole from the base of Migdash. So Asham bar lachet. So L'chayda, ma Chatas psula shaloi lishma. Does that Chatas puzzle if it's loi lishma? Is Afa Osham puzzle shaloi lishma. So too is the Osham puzzle if it is loi lishma.
In the middle. Only middle of saying.
He's explaining himself now. He's going a step further. You're right. It's a modern lotion. That's not how we normally do it. You're right. And then another Indian comes along, and he says, and he argues with Tanakama. You're telling me that the only animal that if you do have the wrong carbon in mind is possible is a carbon Pesach and a carbon Shlamim. But I'm going to go a step further. Any other carbon, if you thought that was a carbon Pesach, or if you thought that was a Chatas, they also become possible. Because since the Chatas and the Osham itself, the Chatas and the Pesach itself is possible if it's the wrong one. So if you take another carbon, had in mind the Chatas and the Pesach, they become possible. So they become possible. Next din, Shimon Achi Azariah. We had in Marsaita. Remember, there's Hillel, whose brother came along, and after Hillel came, the famous Hillel said, you know what? Let's make a Yisachar Zvulun arrangement here. I'll take care of you. Now it's worthless. On the other hand, Shimon and Azariah had this deal going on. Azariah said, I'll support you. You sit and learn Torah, and I'll have a chelik in your Torah. And Moshe writes in the Truth, it has to be 50-50. This has to be a business arrangement. It's not like tzedakah. This is different kind of relation altogether. So therefore, from then on in, every time Shimon says an opinion, he always says Shimon Ache Azariah, because of Azariah, you're able to do it. According to the Rambam, this Azariah is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. That's Azariah, Rabbi Elazar's father. And Shimon is his uncle. Shimon Ache Azariah, he said, I disagree with Tanakama. And that's like this. You tell me a blanket statement. Any carbon you had in mind that something else is always kosher, just you're not yaitza, and except carbon pesach and carbon chatas. I disagree. Depends. Shachten l'shem gevoya. If you shechted it for a carbon which is superior to it, then kshedim. Then it's kosher, just not yaitza. In fact, the machlekes. We'll see later whether that you're maybe even your yaitz as well. If you shechted for something lower, then psulin. What do you mean? Ketzat. You had a carbon that was supposed to be a kachim, and you had in mind, let's say, carbon shlamim, which is kachim kalim. It's a lower level than psulin. But if it's kachim kalim, you had a kachim kalim. Sheshachta l'shem kachim, and you had in mind the same kachim, shayden. It is kosher. Within Kachir, we'll see later in the Gemara as well. There's a hierarchy. There's Chatas, which is higher than Oila, and there's a hierarchy. But he doesn't go into that. So maybe that's why he goes Ketzad. We don't break it down further. Just this is the general rule. kachim kachim versus kachim kalim. That's it. We don't break down within kachim kachim or within kachim kalim what level you are. But then he says in kachim kalim he does, as he says right here. Within kachim kalim, we're going to break it down further. If you shechter shlamim, shlamim is superior. Why? Shlamim, you have to sprinkle 4 corners. You sprinkle on 2 corners and they spread it to another 2, it becomes 4. By ma'aser only 1 corner. Shlamim needs smicha. You have to press down with all your koyach on the animal. Shlamim needs tenufa. You have to wave it. So you have dinim and shlamim which doesn't apply to b'chayr ma'aser. So shlamim is higher. The fact that l'chayra he breaks down kachim kalim and he doesn't break down kachim seems like in kachim
There's only one
there's only 1 level. As far as this is concerned. On the other hand, shlamim sheshal b'chayr ma'aser psul l'pasel. When we say having in mind, the big machlekes is showing we had a little bit of daf heyam and aleph. The bottom page where it comes from mazikim by pigul, whether machshava alone is enough to ruin the animal, or you actually have to say it. You have to say it. No, there's 2 ways of understanding when you say something. When you say something, the pshat is really it's the machshava that makes it happen. But how do we know what the machshava is? So therefore, you're just being real. Or the saying is the words. You need to bring in elam adibur to have some kind of effect in the gashmistic world. Machshava is so ruchnius that it cannot have an effect in the gashmistic world. Yeah, but that's something else. That's a machlek whether you get malchus on. But we have by kachim as well. But you can set aside. But machshava, you have to say them that. A lot of times, and Rashi said by bittul and Pesach we have, for example, Rashi you have to have a mind, right? And Rashi says and you're oimer, and you have to say. In other words, Rashi shita generally in Shas, it's not just kachim. Rashi always learns whenever we say machshava, and you have to say it. You have to say it. Other Rishonim hold on, machshava alone does it, and it's not just a machlekes and kachim. It's not Rashi later, but it's generally an argument. You see it in a lot of places. Anyway, Rashi also holds that there's a lav. It says lo yechoshev, even though it's talking about pigul. Once you tell me and anything else, everything else is an asay. You have to have we live in a puzzle. You have to have the right things in mind. But Rashi then says once you didn't have the right thing in mind, it falls under the general banner of lo yechoshev, and you did a lav as well. It might be a lav shebechol malchus, but you did a lav as well. Others disagree. They say it's only an asay. Anyway, says the Gemara. So modern lashon. It says here that all the animals you check lo lishman is kosher, but the word Ella. Why say Ella? I just say Villa Ola Lebailim. Tell us halacha, but the Bailim, the owners have to bring the carbon again because the word Yaitzer. What's this Ella? Lama Mishnah Ella. Shalai Ola Lisne. It should Ella. Sorry, Lama Mishnah Ella Shalai Ola Lisne. Let's say Villa Ola Lebailim Shechayvi. You weren't Yaitzer. So Gemara Kamash want to tell you Lebailim who Delayalo L'Shem Chayva. I want you to know it's a step more. Not only the Bailim aren't Yaitzer, but I want you to know the only chsaron is the Bailim aren't Yaitzer, but everything else it's still the original carbon. So that because you did the mistake by the shechting, does not automatically say for the rest. Don't worry about you could continue having the wrong thing in mind. No, not at all. You still have to treat it like the original carbon. The only chsaron is that the bailim would yaitza. Otherwise, in every other respect, it's the same as the original carbon.
So the process continues.
No, the Kabbalah, the halach, and all that. All that, yeah, exactly. Whatever the original carbon was, you have to continue as if it's original carbon. The only chsaron is shla ola lebailim. The bailim.
Property of the mizbeach.
Not only that, but you have to continue treating it as if it's original carbon. We can't make more changes. A carbon not having the right carbon in mind. Doesn't give you a license. Okay, well then who cares? I'll continue the zikr the wrong. No. How do I know that? Iba is a mesvara, Iba is a makray. One I have a logic, one I have a pasuk. Iba is a mesvara, b'shum nishani ba kol hani lishne ba v'leizel. Because you made one change, you should continue making more and more changes. Why? Iba is a makra. And otherwise, I could also bring a pasuk. Interesting pasuk. It says in the pasuk, "Moitzes v'secha tishmar." You should keep whatever you say. V'asisa and pasuk say kasha and the darta, and you should do exactly like in neder. Now, you remember, there's a difference between neder and a dava. Sometimes the dava is a generic term, but especially when in the same pasuk you have neder and a dava, it's not the same thing. Neder is harei elai. I take it upon myself. I'll do this and this. And if the animal dies, you got to bring another one. The dava is harei zu. This is the animal I'm going to bring up. If the animal dies, you don't have to bring another one. So the pasuk starts off saying, so we're talking about a neder, and then it's the dava. And then says the pasuk, it's a nedava. How can it be both? So you want a high nedava. What do you mean nedava? Neder, it's a neder. Ella, this is pshat. Im kimosha the dartos is the two parts of the pasuk. If you continue the animal exactly the way you originally promised you'll do it, then no, you ain't neder. It's a neder, and your yates and everything else. Aber im loy. If you by mistake brought it up differently than it's still a carbon. The WA, the animal that you said you'll bring, whatever animal carbon it is, continue with that carbon, and it'll be like in a dove. But you were not yaitze, you're nether. With a dove is saying and therefore not include with a dove mishal just because in a dove, therefore you're allowed to have the wrong things in mind. Of course not. That's why we know you have to continue the same way. Novas, you weren't yaitze, you're nether. I mean, the Papa, Rabbi said, the Papa, it's a pity. He said, La have gamam, but Urta, you weren't last night in yeshiva, but Chumme Becharmach, you weren't last night when we were in this vicinity of the city called Becharmach, you weren't close by. The Rami, Rabba Milme Alisa Hadodi, Rabba was on fire. He was asking questions, stidas one from another, and Vishanilo. And he actually answered them. Says the Gemara, my Milme Alisa, what was the subject? What was it? What were you talking about here? What was it all about? So he says, and see, they didn't look this on Shabbos. This was on Shabbos, and they were giving a shir, a pilpul learning. He said, now it says, Kol hazvachim shenizbechu shaloi lishma. The problem is he had the wrong thing in mind. What happened? He had nothing in mind. Stam. Sounds like it's all right. It's only because you had like you were oiked it. You took it out. We'll learn later all about the concept of akira, taking something and undermining and removing it, and we'll have a machlekes if it, it's only b'shegig or b'mezid if you can change. So what happened? The Amish says you shechted and you had the wrong thing in mind. Is taima the shaloi lishman. You had the wrong thing in mind. Vaystoid ha stama. If you had nothing in mind, you shechted it. Oh, namil bailam shem chayva. It's your yaitze your shem chayva. Why? Alma, what do we see from here? Since you set the animal aside already to be a carbon, and then you continue the activities as if it's that carbon, even though you didn't have Mefedish in mind, whatever the carbon was, you were yaitze. No. How do you compare that with a din we have by Gittin, which we have Raminu? Let me ask you a question. We learned by Gittin, Kol Haget Shenichtiv Shaloi L'Shemisha Pasul, that any get, if you did not write it in having a woman in mind, Ustamanami Pasul. And if, in other words, first part is if you had in mind another woman, same name, another woman called Leah, and you had someone else in mind, definitely not Yaitse. And furthermore, Ustamanami Pasul. By get, we say it's not good enough to write a get stam, having nobody particular in mind. No, by a get, you have to have this particular woman in mind. So what's the difference? Why by Zvach we say stam and lishma, and by get we say stam and lav lishma? Says the Gemara, he says here, V'shani, and Rabbi answered it. I know his answer was Zevachim bistam l'shmonam. You set aside the animal to be a carbon. Minastam, unless you change it, you try to change it. Minastam, the animal is going to be brought up for that very original carbon. You set it aside. So mainly, even stam is l'shma. Oh, but Isha, while she's married, every woman while she's married, what she's forget? Of course not. Isha bistam l'obligation. When that get was written, Minastam, the woman was a married woman. It's only afterwards that the husband decided to divorce her. So therefore, stamon is lab lishman. There's a obligation of medis. This woman is not legation of medis, and therefore this get does not apply to her. And that's why you need lishma by get rather than just stamon. Okay, now that you made two assumptions here. One assumption is that by Zevachim you don't need lishma, stamon is good, and you made another assumption by Gittin you do need lishma. Where do you know that from? Okay, Rabbi gave a question, he gave an answer, take it off the table. Arop Mark. Tell us now, how do you know that? Where does it say that by Zevachim stamon is good enough? Says the Gemara. Interesting cases here, and Pishka Teza has two versions. Teza talks about what about a woman who's mezana? So then, right? If a woman is on, you have to divorce her. So there are women that are so maybe their stomach works. Why doesn't stomach work over there? So Taisa says you don't have to divorce her. You can live with her, but don't have relations. In the Rashba, the Shabbos of the Rashba Paskins. Interesting. If your wife was mezana. Don't know what this means, but he said, if your wife, if somebody's wife was mezana, Not only can you live with her, but you can have relations with her like normal. But instead of her being a wife, she's now a shivcha. Don't know exactly how that spelled out in the real world. What do you mean? And therefore, what's different now? So you don't have to give her mezainis anymore. You could tell her go like by ever. You can tell them go find your own way. Go snore out different food. Is that what he means? It doesn't spell it out. It just says he's like a shivcha. In Piskitosis, the word but not having relations is in brackets, as if in the original text it wasn't there. As if you could even have that taste of stuff also holds you can have relations. Then it was added on the word lot. You can't. Anyway, so interesting. So the Tesis holds here clearly you don't have to divorce, and the Adra goes further. You can have relations and everything. Anyway, somebody in a case where now we use aid him and everything.
The man wants his wife.
He wounded it, yeah. But there's no facts. I'm just speculating. Talking about in real when there was aid him and everything. Yeah, but by Satan there's nothing there. I mean,
you can't assess it.
Yeah. I'm saying there's only. I'm saying there's.
Despite the fact that
Yeah,
really happened, perhaps.
Yeah, in the Ram based in English.
I'm 100% certain if something happened. Right, but because he warned her, even nowadays.
Yeah. Traces says, I'll quote Traces. Lavlis garish beget medis. V'gam im lo yitza ba lo yigashena. Doesn't have to divorce her. Ela shlet shamshenu. Should not have relations. You don't have to divorce her. You can live together. Just you don't have relations. And the Rajba goes further. They can continue, but as and relations and as a shivch. Anyway, let's continue. Back to the Gemara. So we're going to ask now, how do we know all these things? So we're going to go through a few different missions. So we're asking, how do you know this? Minala uzvachim b'stomach shady. Minala, how do you know that it's kosher takvan astam? Elaine, but mahad we learned in our Mishnah. Kol hazvachim it says sheniz b'chu shalosh. Sounds like dafke if you had in mind loyally a different carbon is a problem. But like Tony doesn't say shaloy niz b'chu lishma. Doesn't say if it was not done lishma, it's possible. Gabe get nami. So by get is the same lashon. It says kol haget shenichtiv shaloy l'shemisha. By a get, it says only if you did it shaloi l'shemisha possible. But like Tan doesn't say the shaloi l'shemisha possible. So to say if that's your diuk, because it doesn't say that it's possible by a carbon if you just didn't have mind l'shma. It doesn't say that by a woman either. So how come over there we say that if you didn't have a mind l'shma, it's no good, and here we say it is good? What's the difference? So that diuk can't be correct. Elamaha from the following. If not, we'll learn later on in the Mishnah. The Mishnah talks about what happens. Part of it was done correctly, and part was done not correctly. So we give two examples: lishman, ushalei lishman. You started out doing it correctly, and then later other avodas you did incorrectly. Or the beginning of shchita, we'll see later, you started right, and then the end of shchita you didn't do right, and then the other way around. First you started off wrong, loy lishman, and then you went lishman. You know what happens then? So the Mishnah said later on, Keita, what's an example of lishman, ushalei lishman? L'shem Pesach, it says over there, L'shem Pesach, you started out having in mind on Pesach, and then you change to Shlamim. And then but you start out right, Lishman, and then you change to Lishman. Sounds like the only reason why it's a problem is tying with the Omar L'shem Pesach, L'shem Shlamim. You said, interesting, the Gemara itself says, the Omar. You said, not just thought. L'shem Pesach, Shlamim. L'shem Pesach, L'stama. What would be the example would be the Mishnah is giving an example. You started having in mind Pesach, and then you stopped having in mind anything in particular. It doesn't kosher. Alma l'chayda. What is he from here? That if that's what happened, there's no shaila. Stomach l'shma dummy. That's my daya. That by carbon stomach l'shma. No, who said maybe because you started off right, you started off the shkita right, and then you continue with having nothing in mind. Like with Tanya, that you say every morning by get, I'm writing in the by tell you, I'm writing the Shem Shemayim. The rest of the day, it's all right because it follows. Shining hustle, that's a shining oisa. Once you started or you established what you're doing, you're continuing in the same way. Not because Stamman is good enough. Ella Misafer. The next case says you started off wrong. Shaloi lishman, you had in mind the wrong carbon, and then lishman, you had in mind the right carbon. And what's the example? You started off the same shlamim, and then you do the same Pesach. It seems from there only because you started Shlami. What about steak stamp? I had nothing in mind. And then I had in mind Pesach. And say that's example of Loy Lishman. Isn't that a raya? That stomach is good. Time Adam l'shem l'shem bezek, hosh tam l'shem bezek kosher. Does he want to know? Dilma shiny hustle again? No proof. You know why? The Amar Yochiach Seifer Al Tchilosei. Since it's all part of the same shchita, and at the end you did it correctly, so we say that the Seif is Mechiach Al Tchilosei. That what? Whatever in the beginning. Yeah. Or Inami, you know why the Mishnah doesn't mention Stoman? Because I did the Tana at the beginning, what the Mishnah says, Lishman or Shalishman. The example of Loy Lishman there was Dafka if he had something else in mind. So when he gives an example of Loy Lishman, Lishman, he uses the counter, the flip side of it, the convert, the inverse of it. That's all. But he could have said Stoman. Tananam Lishman, Lishman. No Raya. Elamaho for the following Mishnah. This is what I'm telling you about. You have to have 6 things in mind. You have to have 6 things in mind. If you have to have this in mind by all the activities, especially all 4 activities, the halacha, the first places, and the Rambam passes clearly it's only by shchita, nothing else. And that is, you have to have 6 things in mind. So you have to have the carbon in mind. Nizbach, you have to have the right carbon in mind, and the person l'shem zevach, l'shem zeveach. You have to have the carbon, the veach, who the person will be, and l'shem that you're doing it for the eibishter. And we'll see later all these different things what they are. L'shem ishim, that you're doing it to burn the whole thing, not just to roast it. L'shem reach, you're doing it to give a reach, and not to do it on the bottom, but you have to do it on top of the mizbeach. And l'shem nechay, the eibishter have nachas from it. But everyone holds that you definitely need l'shem zavech, l'shem zavach by all the activities. It's only the machlekes that Rambam takes is the other 4 things. You know, the nachas, know that. The chatas v'osham l'shem chet, and the chatas and the osham, you have to have one more thing in mind: aveda. So Omar and Rabbi Yosef continues. Even if he had nothing in their mind, kosher is kosher. Why? Tanai bezin who, because it's like a tanai bezin bringing a carbon, it's all good. In fact, the bezin doesn't want you to have things in mind, because if you're going to start making you have things in mind, what if you have the wrong thing in mind? This way we don't tell you don't have nothing in mind. Just make the carbon the way it is. Then no mistakes can happen. That's what Rabbi Yosef says. Shetanai bezin who. So asnu bezin. So bezin made a tanai the loy lema lishmoy that you should not say that it's what it's lishmoy, because with skid then you'll have the wrong thing in mind. This way, don't have anything in mind, it can't go wrong. If we start telling you have a carbon in mind, what happens if you have the wrong carbon in mind? Now, if you tell me if you have nothing in mind, the carbon is possible, how can that be easy? Because he's worried that people make mistakes, go against the Torah. If the din is that stomach is not lishma, how can Bezin come along and say, I don't have anything in mind, you're in a carbon? So that's our idea that stomach is lishma. No. Sorry?
The base that has confidence in the average person is capable of thinking nothing.
Because it's hamoinam. Yeah, you always have to think of the lowest common denominator.
Ordinary citizen.
They got to get. Okay, the stomach possible. How about get stomach is possible. Elaine, my mother time I learned how you either b'shuk. A guy was walking down the street, somebody heard Sefer Makin, he's playing, and if a guy said, okay, he's writing a get, and he's saying, oh, I'm writing a get for Mendel, who's divorcing Leah. The guy said, oi, that's my name, and that's my wife's name. No, and said, let me take the get. You wrote it. Let me take the get. No, it was the Sefer saying, I'm writing this get. So it sounds like it was written, Stam, right? So he wrote Stam. He's practicing whatever. He wrote Stam, and he said, "Oh, perfect! It's for me." That's how we know Stam is possible. No, because no matter they were training, a get has to be written because of you have to write it because of law. You have to write it is having in mind it should be a divorce. This was not even written as a divorce. It was Stam. They were practicing. That's why everybody all the suffering practice on Megillah. Megillah Esther. Because that's you don't have to have all these dinim of Lishma and everything else. Elamaha from here, that's what yes, okay, more. Cost of the Gadish is Ishtay. If a guy wrote to divorce his wife, the Nimlech, so he was written L'Shem get. And then he changed his mind. He met another neighbor. I spent all this money to get. We're all I heard you want to divorce your wife, and the guy says, yes, I want to divorce my wife. You have same name, fantastic. I'll buy it for you for half price. Cost of the Gadish boy. We see from here what? That Stamon is no good. Dilma Shiny Hossam, the Integral Shem Gerushin, Dahu. No, there was written for a different person. That's not case of stomach. Ella Mahafim here, yes, okay, more than that, yesterday he has two wives. Just saying Shabbos, imagine you have two wives the same name. I don't know how that works, but the cost of the guys, it's like the guys if you wrote it for the older wife, you cannot write for the young, you can't use it. Again, is that ayah stomach is no good? Again, the person said no, ayah Dilma Shiny Hossam, the Integral Shem Gerushin. Dahu, he wrote for Gerushin for he wrote it for another person. I'm saying so we're trying to prove that by get stomach is no good. Here it's not stomach. Here you had in mind another woman, even though it's your wife. So what? It's another woman. Yes, okay. The following it says in the Mishnah in Gittin, you said to the I have two wives the same name. Do me a favor. I don't know which one I want to divorce. I can't live with two of them. So Hadgocha Pratis, whoever walks out the house first, like Yiftach, is the one that's getting divorced, and they both have the same name. Possible the garage boy, you cannot divorce. And he wasn't written for any particular woman. So what it says, so some you see, Stamman's possible. Because really you wrote it for one person. You just don't know which one it is. That's not Stamman. Stamman is you wrote it for nobody in particular. I just writing a get stam and I'll use it. Elamahar from the following din, Hakoisiv Taifse Gittin. If somebody writes that there's two parts of a get, there's the Taifus and the Taif. So somebody writes the Taifus of the Gittin. Stam the most of it, not the names and Hadiyat. Sheniach Makam Isha leave that blank. That has to be written in the Shema. You can't just put a name in there. You're writing Mama should get the name. Those are the main words of a get. And you have to leave it because once you know the woman is, so when he's someone doesn't. See you tomorrow, Mitzvah.